Thank you for joining us for the program Shifts in Global Trade and Supply Chain Due in 2020. Our first speaker is Doreen Edelman with Lowenstein Sandler in Washington, D.C. Doreen founded and chairs the firm's global trade and policy practice. She regularly advises clients on the risks associated with export controls, customs matters, and U.S. sanctions in cross-border M&A and investment transactions, and on the compliance requirements pertaining to technology, software, defense articles and services, and commercial goods. Our next speaker is Mark Bedford, a partner at Zhong Law Firm in Hong Kong. He specializes in commercial dispute resolution. His practice focuses on cross-border commercial litigation and arbitration, mainly concerning debt recovery, sale of goods, and international trade. He also advises on employment, construction and engineering, and other commercial disputes. He has considerable experience in international arbitration, regularly advising on disputes conducted under various arbitration rules, such as the ICC, HKIAC, and UNCITRAL. Our next speaker is Michael Doyle with Seri Manop in Thailand. Mike Doyle is a U.S. attorney and senior partner who has practiced in Thailand since 1996. He is the author of the books Doyle's Practical Guide to Thailand Business Law, 5th edition, and the co-author of Doyle's Practical Guide to Business Law in Asia, 2nd edition. Mike has represented hundreds of foreign investors in Thailand in establishing subsidiaries, negotiating joint ventures, providing representative in disputes, and providing advice concerning tax and finance. Mike has published over 70 articles in the English language, such as the Bangkok Post, The Nation, many other magazines, and trade journals. Our next speaker is Ying Li, partner and head of banking and finance at Kelvin Partnership based in Singapore. Her areas of practice include banking and finance, joint ventures, and mergers and acquisitions, with a particular focus on cross-border transactional work. She combines her extensive exposure to corporate and commercial transactions, excellent drafting skills, and in-depth understanding of the legal, regulatory, and business environment in Singapore and other countries to provide effective solutions that meet the business needs of her clients. In Vietnam, she spearheads the firm's banking and real estate work. Our final speaker is Michael Liu, partner at Hylands Law Firm based in Beijing. He serves as the chair of the legal committee of AmCham China. He is a representative of TerraLex, a member of INTA, a committee member of the International Business Committee of Chaoyang Lawyer Association, and the director of Seamen Chamber. He is also a lecturer of the Hochschule Darmstadt University of Applied Sciences, the Beijing Chemistry University, the Peking University, and he is an expert of the Belt and Road Commercial Dispute Mediation Group of the Beijing Bar Association in 2017.
Welcome, everybody. We have a very quick amount of time here to talk about the supply chain world from the perspective of our four fabulous panelists we have. I'm Doreen Edelman, and I chair the Lowenstein Sandler Global Trade Practice Group out of Washington, D.C. Through that process, I work a lot with companies that are importing, exporting, and dealing with foreign investment, and I have noticed changes relating to supply chain in the last 6 months or so, well, actually a year if you want to talk about the beginning of all the Trump trade Section 301 wars, if you will. But there's a silver lining that I see coming out of these transitions we've seen in trade and with the virus, and that is that senior management, C-suite executives, investors, and lawyers that never knew anything or cared at all about global supply chain now have to be involved and knowledgeable about global supply chain, because as our panelists are going to explain, and as we're going to talk through here today, we can't avoid it. I mean, it is a crucial factor for businesses. Today is May 27th that we're doing this taping, and every day we're seeing more and more bankruptcies. As of this morning, just two issues that I wanted to point out that exasperate these trade wars and the repercussions to the supply chain. One is that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced today that he does not see Hong Kong as a separate trading entity from China, based on what the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government have been doing, and that the U.S. supports the Chinese people. So from his rhetoric today, it sounds like we could see more tightening of our openness of trade with Hong Kong, and that will, of course, affect where manufacturers and companies want to establish and do business as a gateway to Asia. And then we also saw last week, May 20th, the U.S. Senate passed a bill to kick Chinese companies off of the U.S. stock exchange. So we're continuing to see this pressure, and it has to affect companies that are doing business in China. Just one other factor I wanted to mention, I did a little look. I wanted to see how many of the Fortune 1000 companies actually have supply chains that go into the affected area around Wuhan in China. And out of the top 1,000 companies, 938 have tier 2 or higher suppliers in the Wuhan area of China. So there's just, the effect has got to be enormous. So with that, I want to move on to our panelists. We have Mark Bedford from Hong Kong, Michael Liu from mainland China, Ying Li from Vietnam, and Michael Doyle from Thailand. Let me start with you, Michael L. I'm sorry we have Michael and Mike. Tell me what you're seeing now in China regarding getting back to work, factories up in production. What are companies experiencing?
It's quite an interesting phenomenon that we're seeing right now in mainland China, that more and more business starting getting back to work, and the more factors, including manufacturers. As a matter of fact, some of the manufacturers actually never stopped, especially the one that actually make masks, make some of the medical equipment. This is actually very important. It has played a very important role during the pandemic of coronavirus. I think the precautions has been taken all over mainland China. Even today, wherever we go, we still have to get our temperature tested, and then we have to show our barcode on a software on our cell phone wherever we travel. Believe it or not, I already started traveling almost a month. I was in Chengdu, Shenzhen, Changsha. I'm in Shanghai right now. So people try to get their business go back to normal way.
So you're seeing, I mean, is it from your perspective then that companies that are supplying product from China should not have any supply issues now in China?
I think they do, but from some different perspectives. In terms of the manufacturer part of the standpoint, I think more and more factories start going back to work and then start to producing products. From the domestic distribution standpoint, it's okay. This is also including the Chinese company and foreign company, U.S. company. For example, like General Motors, right? So they actually never stop selling cars in mainland China. The virus actually helped them to boom up the sale of the cars, because majority of the people, if they can afford a car, they don't want to use public transportation. So
that makes
something
sense.
like that actually never really got impact. It's interesting. I talked with the person who's in charge of Nestle, the Nespresso coffee. Those little thing that actually they got 3 times more sales than the same first season from last year. And in terms of the new clients, they actually got 20% more only by the first 3-4 months of this year. This is actually shocking.
Well, thank you. That is interesting. Michael Doyle, are you seeing companies come over to Thailand to look at it as a alternative to China?
Yes, I mean, not just here recently, but since the beginning of the U.S.-China trade war a couple years ago, we've seen a lot of interest to shift production from China to Thailand, particularly by U.S. companies that are trying to avoid the U.S. tariffs on Chinese manufactured goods. The sectors that we've seen this happen the most is food and automotive. The way it's worked in Thailand is that multinationals and large SMEs have made the decision to shift production, as quickly as possible from China to Thailand by way of expanding existing facilities. They do that because it's just too damn hard to start from scratch in a new country. They'll try to expand existing production in Thailand, and they'll require their supply chain, packaging, logistics, service providers to open up businesses, to open up offices in Thailand almost immediately, or they'll risk losing the multinationals' business. If I compare the experience of multinationals and large U.S. SMEs in this respect, the large SMEs have the advantage in that they're a little bit more nimble and adaptable. They're not stuck to global policies applicable everywhere. But also, the SMEs are not as risk averse as the multinationals. I mean, the disadvantage for the SMEs, though, is they're much more strapped for cash, right? And they don't have all the systems that multinationals do for scaling up.
So are you seeing these multinationals or SMEs that are already in China and they're using, or they already had a little bit in Thailand, and then they've said, we want to put more of our production in Thailand?
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
Got it. So Ying, how about the same in Vietnam? Are you seeing a shift from companies that were manufacturing in China and they're moving to Vietnam? Are you seeing new Asian startups in Vietnam? What's the options there?
For Vietnam, we are seeing both. There are, of course, existing US companies that have operations already in Vietnam. They are, of course, expanding. But we are also seeing many new companies coming into Vietnam. And these are not just the American companies, the European companies. They're actually PRC companies, Chinese companies moving their own operations out of China into Vietnam as an alternative. And this has been carrying on because of the U.S. trade war. So it's about diversification for a lot of these companies. I think we acknowledge that it's not about replacing China, because that's quite difficult because of all the supply chains that China has in place. It's about exploring an alternative diversification policy, China plus one, China plus two. So we do see a lot of MNCs as well as local companies basically increasing production in the past a year or two. So you have people like Apple, Foxconn, Samsung. They are all moving into Vietnam, and I think the advantage of Vietnam is that it's got a very long border with China, and in fact, actually, I think as it stands now, a lot of Vietnam manufacturers are actually part of the integrated supply chain with China. So it is I guess, a viable alternative, an option for a lot of foreign investors looking to diversify.
That's very interesting. So for some U.S. companies, they may be able to speak with their Chinese supply chain about options in Vietnam, or if they've already established any type of relationships with lower level tier suppliers. I mean, I'm just concerned after what we heard today with Pompeo that companies, as you said, they have to, it's not about getting out of China. It's you've got to have more than China.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mark, please weigh in on this, because traditionally, my mind, to get into Hong Kong and to get into the region, Hong Kong was where foreign companies would set up a holding company whether it was for tax reasons or anything else, as a gateway into the region. So what are you seeing in terms of companies making the shift out of China into other countries?
Well, there is undoubtedly a shift, Doreen, and in terms of Hong Kong's role, I still see a role for it. It's long been the entrepot between China and the rest of the world, a place where goods are brought for import and export, and more importantly, perhaps a gateway to China for foreign businesses and investment. And many foreign companies investing in China, as you mentioned, have therefore done that through Hong Kong entities. And in fact, 2/3 of foreign direct investment into China still comes through Hong Kong. It's also where many foreign companies have established their regional headquarters. As of June last year, some 9,000 foreign companies have their regional headquarters in Hong Kong. Approximately 1,300 companies from the US, 700 from the UK, and 1,400 from Japan. Now, many of those foreign companies will have been focusing primarily on investing in and or trading with China. But as we see investment spread to countries other than China throughout the region, such as Vietnam and Thailand, some of those manufacturing companies in Vietnam and Thailand will be held by foreign entities through Hong Kong entities as well. And in the last few years, we have seen more investment by Hong Kong companies in the Southeast Asian countries. For example, in the first half of 2019, Hong Kong was Vietnam's leading source of foreign direct investment, investing over 5 billion US into the country. And obviously, much of this comes as a result of China's Belt and Road Initiative, which seeks to promote cooperation and trade with other countries in Asia and in Africa and Europe. So there is still a role for Hong Kong entities as holding companies for foreign businesses in China, in the region. But I think that will still mainly be for companies investing in China. The other thing I would say, Doreen, that you mentioned about, obviously there is a shift in supply chains in the region with countries wanting to reduce their dependency on China. However, I do wonder if there is a limit to how much production can be shifted from other countries, from China to other countries in Southeast Asia, given that they are significantly smaller than China. If you look, for example, at the automotive industry, about 21 million passenger cars were produced in China last year, as I understand. And that obviously required a huge amount of investment over a period of time to set up those manufacturing plants. Those are expensive to set up, and it's not necessarily easy to replicate them in other countries. Also, if you move the manufacturing plants from China to other countries, there's less opportunity to sell the products directly into the Chinese market. And of course, China's not just a producer nowadays, but it's a huge market as well. So while I think we're going to see continuation of diversification of supply chains throughout the Southeast Asian region, I think a significant proportion of manufacturing production is still going to stay in China.
Thank you. So if you would stay on the hot seat for one more minute and tell us about what's happening right now in Hong Kong and how it may factor in to this trade war between the U.S. and China. If the U.S. does say we're going to put tariffs and other trade restricting actions on Hong Kong, would you see any change in what you just went through as the benefits of Hong Kong and all these companies going through Hong Kong to do their business in the region?
Yeah, there could be some impact, but I think it's a little early to tell. Obviously, what's happening at the moment is China has, in the last week, threatened and has said it's going to introduce a new national security law in Hong Kong. It will impose it on Hong Kong rather than doing it through Hong Kong's own legislative council. And as a result of that, we've had some protests already in the last few days, some protests last night. And as you say, the US Secretary of State has said that under the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which the US introduced last year, that obliges the US to certify each year whether China is in compliance with the Sino-British Accord on Hong Kong. And if it's no longer considered to be sufficiently autonomous Hong Kong, then it's going to lose its special treatment and commercial privileges under US law. Now, we've yet to see what's going to happen. Trump hasn't said what those loss of privileges might actually entail. One sort of thing is that tariffs on goods which are re-exported from Hong Kong may be imposed. There aren't such tariffs at the moment because of Hong Kong's special status. So we could see tariffs imposed like that, and that could have an effect on Hong Kong. There is, however, a contrary view in that some people think that if this national security law is imposed on Hong Kong, at least it resolves the situation, and there is a degree of certainty then. And some people think that actually may, in the long run, be good for Hong Kong, in that it will stabilize markets. And well, we can't see what's going to happen in the near or long term with the protests, and it remains to be seen what will happen over the next days and weeks. There are very much two sides to the argument, and I think some people do think if there is certainty, it's not going to damage necessarily Hong Kong's position. It may not enhance it, but it may not damage the position here.
Thanks. So would you say, I mean, you mentioned about all these companies that are already entwined in the Hong Kong holding company structure, et cetera. I would assume that they can't change that structure very quickly. So companies are at least going to stay with what they've got. And as Ying said, diversified. They're not going to pull out of Hong Kong.
I don't think they will. I think we'll see more investment probably throughout the Southeast Asian region than in China, perhaps. But I can't see companies cutting their ties with China through Hong Kong, not in the short term.
Thanks. Okay, Mr. Liu, let's go back to China. So I am very curious, as companies are starting to diversify and move outside of China, you already pointed out that, of course, there is a market in China. So companies are, in a sense, refurbishing, or they could keep their Chinese manufacturing because China is a big market. But are we seeing Chinese companies themselves hedge their bets by having a facility in China and then also in Vietnam, Thailand, or South Korea in order so that they can take advantage of tariff reduction issues in order to get their products out to the United States or Europe?
That's a very good question. I think companies in the world, including Chinese companies, American companies, always want to look at the alternative and what will be the best choice for them. Wherever is our market, that's one of the things that, of course, be part of the consideration. Wherever we can gather raw material, this is really important. One thing I want to mention is that for the rare earths, China and the US actually are the two top countries with most of those reserves, and then we got nowhere else, to go. So whatever that product's made out of that, and pretty much it will be based in US or in mainland China. For Chinese companies, it's the same. Like American companies, we always look at opportunities wherever with cheaper labor, with easier access to the local market. Depends on the products as well. I have heard some of the Chinese company move to Vietnam, move to other places like Philippines, like Indonesia. But interesting enough, they always have to move a lot of skilled labor force along with the factory. I mean, it's easy to build a building, to put a machine into it. That's not a problem. But whether the whole factory can work and how long does it take for the new factory to produce the products? And that's always a question that a business need to ask themselves.
So if U.S. lawyers are interested in helping their companies and they're looking for alternatives, they should also consider having strategic conversations with their Chinese supplier base and see if they've already set up opportunities in the region to take advantage of, or learn from them about where the labor force is, et cetera, et cetera.
I do agree with your point. Yes, I think that's actually a very good opinion. The difficulty and complexity for the supply chains all over the world, including in U.S. and China, is one of the reasons is because usually when we talk about supply chain, usually it's not one party involved. For very simple products like iPhone or something, there are hundreds, even thousands, different companies involved. One company just make a very little thing, another company make another little thing, and then you have to assemble together. Now, a lot of times, the reason why the international investors want to talk with the Chinese supply chains is that wherever they got raw material, wherever they make all of the thousands different components together, and it's always questioned about the location for assembling. So if they assemble in Taiwan, or if they assemble in Thailand, or in Vietnam, then the origin of
Country of origin
might be different. And
yes.
If they sell to South Asia market, then it might be easier to get into the local market. And then if it goes south to the US, there's always a calculation where you manufacture what is certain percentage of the components and where you assemble and everything. That will influence their duty and everything. So yes, and
that's a good point. If we have U.S. companies paying attention to this video, if you can shift your country of origin, if your substantial transformation, if you can get it outside of China, and there are different ways to do that based on the essential character of the product, where it's substantially transformed, et cetera. If you can change the country of origin, even if it's assembled in China, it's labeled made in Japan or made in the Philippines, and then you don't pay the Chinese duties coming in the U.S. So that is something to consider for companies that haven't looked at that. Ying, let's go back to Vietnam, because you have explained to me in the past that there's a lot of government programs. I don't know if they're new, taking advantage of the last 18 months of Trump tariffs, or if they've been in existence a long time. But please explain what help the government is offering for companies that want to manufacture.
Well, I think the Vietnam government has also generally been very supportive for foreign investors coming in and those who are seeking to move the operations into Vietnam. I think the support is, I think, being a bit readily available, access to information, and of course, they have been ramping up the space at the industrial and business parks, and which is where a lot of the manufacturing spaces are and is being based. And they, of course, I think as Michael mentioned, of course, there is this difficulty, of course, you can't just shift the entire supply chain because there are many considerations. It's not just one item, the entire item coming out of one particular supplier. But I think what we are seeing here is more, there is a greater motivation now, more than ever. I think these issues have always been there, and I guess for a long time. But like you said, U.S. companies, European companies felt that there's no need to consider any shift because we are comfortable where we are. Everything is there. The labor is highly skilled, and we don't have any issues. But of course, with this latest, with the whole trade war and the COVID-19 issue, I think many investors are starting to realize that however hard as it may be to have to move some of our supply chain out of China is something that we have to do. And so I think the basically, well, the Vietnam government has not really put in place any specific incentives this past 2 years. They have, of course, generally been very welcoming of foreign investors. And in terms of the cost of doing business in Vietnam, it is comparable or even lower than some of the other countries in the region. So it has become a very attractive proposition for suppliers as well as manufacturers looking for alternatives.
Any particular industries that you're seeing?
It cuts across all of the industries. Traditionally, of course, Vietnam has been very strong in manufacturing, the manufacturing sector. But of course, in the past few years, we've been seeing a lot of supply chains in the electronic sector, like Apple, Foxconn, Samsung, and the Japanese manufacturers actually moving the operations into Vietnam. And of course, Vietnam has in place a number of double taxation treaties as well as trade agreements with countries in the region. So that, including, for example, Singapore. Singapore is similar to how Hong Kong functions. It's a very popular country for foreign investors to set up their regional headquarters or their holding company to invest into Vietnam. And because of the DTA between Singapore and Vietnam, a lot of the taxes have been reduced. So that's how I think the government of Vietnam is trying to encourage foreign investors to come into Vietnam.
Thanks. So, Mike, let's go back to Thailand. What incentives or what advantages do you see coming into Thailand over other countries? And you mentioned that there may be some legal and practical issues dealing with Thailand, and how are they obviously easily addressed?
So one major advantage Thailand's had in the region in attracting specifically U.S. investment is something called the Treaty of Economic Relations between Thailand and the U.S. This isn't anything new. It's been around for over 40 years. But this treaty allows U.S. companies operating in Thailand national treatment. Okay, national treatment, which means U.S. held companies are treated just like locally held companies, only with a few exceptions. For example, if you have a factory in Thailand, but your local company also wants to import and sell goods locally, normally to do so in Thailand or other developing countries in the region, you'd have to ask for special permission, but U.S. companies don't. Also, it's an advantage with respect to after-sale services, for goods produced in Thailand or produced outside of Thailand. Normally, you'd have to apply for something called the foreign business license, and there's versions of that in other developing countries in the region. But for U.S. companies, you don't. That's a major advantage that's only available to U.S. companies, and it's something that the Japanese, the Germans, the Chinese, and UK companies, all of which invest more than the Americans do, complain about. And the only thing that the U.S. company has to do to qualify is to be majority, the Thai subsidiary has to be majority U.S. held, and a majority of its local board of directors has to be either U.S. or Thai.
That's very interesting. So what they're doing is they're pushing, make things here, but also consider Thailand as a market.
Oh, for sure.
Mark, sitting in Hong Kong, what have you seen in terms of the shift of the global supply chain to other countries, not just Thailand and Vietnam, but South Korea as well, and Indonesia? Did you have comments whether we're increasing what you're seeing through Hong Kong because of this?
I think there's certainly an increase throughout Southeast Asia. It's not just Thailand and Vietnam. South Korea is obviously another country where there's going to be more supply chains moved to. Although I think again it's not so much cheaper in South Korea. I think the cost of labor probably is significantly higher than in China. Maybe that Vietnam and Thailand are more attractive. I think Indonesia again is another country, and possibly the Philippines. These are all countries where we're going to see this diversification, this shift away from China. Although, as I said, I think a lot of production will remain in China, but there will be a movement throughout the whole of the Southeast Asian region.
So I suppose if a company said, we're interested in the region and we don't know where to go, you would probably say, well, come talk to people in Hong Kong first, because they've got their fingers in the whole region in terms of what's going on. Is that a fair?
Yeah, I think Hong Kong is one of the, it's a major hub in the region. We're different from Thailand and Vietnam and China in that Hong Kong is no longer a manufacturing country itself. Hong Kong's manufacturing moved to mainland China 30, 40 years ago, and the main industries in Hong Kong now are trading and logistics, financial services, professional services, and tourism. Those are the four key pillars of the Hong Kong economy. So Hong Kong's strength is really now as an international financial trade and logistics center. And as such, I think its role in regional supply chains is probably advising as to where to go, but also as a fundraising market for companies who may want to establish supply chains in the region, and also providing logistics services. It's interesting, in 2019, there were, I think, 146 IPOs hosted by the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. 18 of those were from companies in Southeast Asia, which have looked to Hong Kong for capital to fund their growth. And Hong Kong's also obviously got many investment and private equity funds as well. So I think we're going to see an increase in Southeast Asian countries looking to Hong Kong as somewhere where they can raise finance. And I think the other area where Hong Kong can help is in logistics services as well. It's a major logistics hub. It's got a substantial container port, and its airport handles the largest cargo throughput in the world. So, supply chains are diversifying through the region, but I think we're still going to see a lot of goods passing through Hong Kong, either from these countries to in China, or the market there, or to other countries in the world. And also, I think we're still going to be seeing a lot of goods passing through Hong Kong from China, because I think we're still going to have a significant manufacturing amount of production coming from China.
Thank you. Michael, let's end with China, because I'd like you to talk a little about liquidity. How is liquidity working? Let's say that some of these Chinese companies want to diversify and go over to Vietnam or Thailand. I mean, what's the government doing there? How is liquidity after both the virus and with the trade war?
Oh, I see. If this is a Chinese company, they want to move part of their supply chain and manufacture to Vietnam or Thailand, they don't really have to shut down their business in mainland China. I think a lot, on the contrary, a lot of Chinese companies, when they do that, they still consider as mainland China as a big market. It's just that they look for something else. Let's just say maybe cheaper labor, maybe cheaper land or whatever. But if you see liquidity for a business, let's just say a business they have to somehow, then there's a procedure that you can do that. Business will have to consider as labor contract issue, taxes issue, as well as the liquidity assets. If there are creditors that they cannot pay off, then there's a procedure for through the People's Court, go through the bankruptcy procedures and insolvency, and that is also available. But at the end, I do want to say before we finish, China is where China is not really because of Chinese itself. Really, I mean the business from all over the world has helped mainland China to build its business. So this is China is part of the family, and the same thing with the US is part of the family. And all of this really because of everybody from all over the world. Now we have difficulties of the virus. Now we have this difficulty because the politicians, what they say, what they do. We have the greatest so-called Sino-U.S. trade war. But I think the business will figure that out. They will make right decision. What will be the best for themselves?
I think that is a great way to end this. I want to thank everybody, and good comment, Michael, that the businesses have to figure this out and they have to do it together. And let's hope the barriers, I know we all want the barriers to be reduced so that global business will thrive. So again, thank you all for taking the time to do this. And thank you, TerraLex, for putting it together. And if anyone has questions, please, I am sure that our contact information will be part of this, but reach out. We've got representatives. If you've got another country of interest, please either contact me or TerraLex or anyone on the panel, and we'll get you to the right person. Have a great day.